Imagine standing in a glittering ballroom, chandeliers dripping with light, 1,000 eyes glimmering with admiration. It's your husband's night. The man you've loved for 12 years, celebrated for his success, honored for his vision. But as he takes the stage, adjusts the microphone, and thanks his mistress, in front of everyone, your world doesn't just crack. It detonates. Tonight, you're about to hear how a woman turned her heartbreak into revelation, and uncovered an $8 million secret that changed everything. Stay with me. Because what started as one moment of betrayal became a chain of discoveries that reached deep into private accounts, offshore transfers, and a carefully constructed web of lies hidden in plain sight. But before the truth surfaced, there was love. Real love. Or at least, what she thought was real. She met Daniel in her second year of graduate school. He was charismatic, already successful, the kind of man who made people feel seen. Together, they built a life that looked flawless, a home that appeared peaceful, a marriage that seemed unbreakable. They had routines, morning coffee together, Sunday hikes, annual charity galas. To the outside world, they were the definition of stability. But what no one saw were the small things, the late-night phone calls that ended too quickly, the unexplained absences, the subtle way he changed the subject when money came up. For years, she told herself it was stress. That success comes with distance. That silence could mean nothing. Until the night of the awards ceremony, the night her intuition stopped whispering and started screaming. When he thanked another woman for her unwavering support, the audience clapped. But she froze. Because she recognized the name. It wasn't a colleague. It was a woman she had trusted, her husband's financial consultant, someone who'd been inside their home, inside their books. From that moment, she began documenting everything. Receipts. Transfers. Calls. Emails. For weeks, she stayed quiet, smiling for photographs, attending dinners, while behind closed doors, she built her own case. What she uncovered wasn't just infidelity. It was theft. A coordinated siphoning of assets, joint investments funneled into private entities, shell accounts that led to the mistress, and eventually, a hidden property worth nearly $8 million. Every detail she found was more precise than the last, down to the date, the initials, the signatures. And still, she said nothing. She waited for the perfect stage. The same stage where he had once thanked his mistress. 3 months later, at a corporate gala streamed live to thousands, she stood up before he could speak. Calm. Collected. A folder in her hand. What followed wasn't a confrontation, it was a presentation. Documents projected on the screen behind her. Transfers traced. Emails verified. A paper trail so clear, no one dared move. And when she reached the final page, showing the $8 million property deed, the room fell silent. You could almost hear the sound of a life collapsing. But this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about power, the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't break things, doesn't beg for revenge. It builds its case and lets the truth speak for itself. And if you think you know how this ends, stay. Because what happened after that night is even more shocking, and it's still unfolding. Follow the full investigation. Hear from those who were there, see the documents for yourself, and decide, was it justice, or something else entirely? In the weeks after that night, the world around her changed. The chandeliers were gone, the applause replaced by silence. The headlines that once carried her husband's name in gold now spoke in whispers, fragments of a story no one fully understood. The cameras had stopped flashing. The guests who had witnessed that shocking speech moved on, labeling it a moment of discomfort, an awkward mistake at a perfect event. But for her, that night wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of an unraveling. Because exposure was never her goal. Truth was. She didn't want revenge. She wanted clarity. And clarity demands patience. Precision. Proof. What most people didn't know was that she had been preparing for months. Dozens of USB drives labeled with dates. Conversations archived on encrypted folders. Bank statements traced line by line. Every transfer recorded, every number cross-checked against another. She wasn't guessing. She was building something larger than infidelity. It wasn't a hunch anymore. It was a structure, and like every structure built on lies, it only needed the right pressure to collapse. Through a quiet contact in corporate compliance, a woman she once mentored, she obtained access to a pattern of internal filings. One caught her eye, an investment entity registered under a familiar signature. Except the name was reversed, her husband's initials, inverted, buried within a chain of holding companies across multiple jurisdictions. Small amounts. Regular intervals. Transfers disguised as consulting fees and licensing agreements. Too insignificant to trigger red flags individually, but together, they formed a clear path. A path leading directly to a property she'd never heard of, owned by someone she never expected. The same woman he had thanked on stage. The betrayal wasn't a single act. It was a system. It had been designed, tested, refined over years. They had shared bank accounts. Signed investment contracts side by side. Built a public image of partnership, philanthropy, and vision. But underneath, every signature, every handshake, every wire transfer told a different story, one of calculated deceit hidden in the language of business growth. And to her, each of those missing dollars represented more than loss. They represented moments. Birthdays. Anniversaries. The quiet night spent believing she was building something sacred. Every cent had been stolen from her time, her trust, her belief in the word ours. She began mapping connections across multiple accounts, old tax filings, charity board payments, conference travel reimbursements. And then she noticed it, repeated payments to a consulting firm listed under an unfamiliar name. The firm had no website, no public record of employees, yet received steady transfers, always just under reporting thresholds. It was her husband's personal shadow fund. A financial corridor feeding his other life, masked as professional operations. She didn't tell anyone. Not her friends. Not her lawyer. Not even her parents. Because she knew, one misstep could make everything disappear. She had seen what power could do when cornered. So she waited. She documented. She planned. She let him believe that silence meant surrender. When she finally confronted him, there were no raised voices. No accusations. Just the sound of her placing a single folder on the table, the one labeled, Mira Holdings, Property Dossier. He didn't ask what it was. He didn't reach for it. He just stared. Because he knew. That folder contained everything. The shell companies, the signatures, the mistress's name, the property title, and the time-stamped receipts that linked them all. He said nothing. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He simply stood, walked to the window, and stayed silent, as if trying to remember at what point the deception had stopped feeling like one. The next day, she filed a civil suit. Marital fraud. Asset concealment. Misuse of shared investments. The court filings landed like thunder in the quiet corridors of his empire. It wasn't the kind of case that drew tabloid headlines. There were no scandalous photos, no shouting matches on television. But inside legal circles, people noticed. The precision of her evidence. The sheer volume of data. Every document matched. Every timestamp aligned. It wasn't rage. It was mathematics. Even his lawyers, men who had once admired his control, couldn't deny what they were seeing. They were forced to confront the architecture of deceit their own client had designed. But what no one saw, what no one could have imagined, was the emotional cost of truth. Nights spent scrolling through old messages, replaying conversations she thought were love, now realizing they were cover. Friends who stopped calling, unsure how to handle someone who carried both grief and victory in the same breath. And through it all, she kept working. Her mind sharper than ever, her heart heavy but steady. Because she knew that surviving meant more than exposing him, it meant understanding how this could happen, so it could never happen again. She began collaborating with financial advocacy groups, quietly, behind the scenes. She met women and men whose stories mirrored hers, people who had lost control not through ignorance, but through trust. Together, they built a framework. A way to trace hidden assets, to recognize patterns of coercive control woven into financial systems. What began as one act of exposure grew into a quiet revolution, teaching others to safeguard their truth before it could be taken from them. As for him, the man who once stood beneath the spotlight, thanking another woman for her unwavering support. His empire has since fractured under investigation. Offshore accounts frozen. Properties seized. Associates questioned. His name now appears in documents he never intended to be public, listed beside the very evidence that brought him down. And she? She never looked back. She said her piece on stage once, and never again. The investigation continues, and the lessons remain. If you've ever doubted your intuition, listen closer. If you've ever been told to stay quiet, document everything. Because sometimes, the truth doesn't come from confrontation, it comes from evidence. Months passed. The headlines faded. The whispers quieted. And the woman at the center of the storm found herself alone for the first time in over a decade. The world had seen the grand exposure, the press releases, the courtroom sketches, the silence of a man who once commanded every room he entered. But what came after wasn't victory. It was emptiness, the quiet kind that lingers long after the noise disappears. The courtroom wasn't cinematic. It wasn't gilded with chandeliers or dressed in gold. It was sterile. Fluorescent lights. Cold air. The faint hum of machines keeping time with her heartbeat. Rows of legal pads stacked neatly beside pens that would capture words she had waited years to say. And him, sitting just a few feet away. Older somehow. Quieter. Eyes fixed not on her, but on the table in front of him, the way guilty men often stare at surfaces that can't look back. For hours, she listened. To the numbers. To the rationalizations. To the way he described their life as if it were a business deal that went off course, an unfortunate miscalculation. He spoke of percentages and projections, never of promises. But when she took the stand, she didn't speak of betrayal. She spoke of trust, how it doesn't vanish all at once, but erodes quietly, spreadsheet by spreadsheet, until what's missing isn't money, it's belief. The judgment came months later. A settlement. Assets returned. The $8 million accounted for, divided, corrected, stamped, and signed. But there was no applause. No satisfaction. Because justice, for her, was never about reclaiming wealth, it was about reclaiming truth. And truth doesn't always comfort you. Sometimes, it just frees you. She left the city soon after. No interviews. No statements. No posts. She bought a small house on the coast, quiet, faded, wrapped in fog. The kind of place where mornings begin in silence and end with waves pulling secrets back into the sea. Locals say she walked every morning before sunrise, barefoot on the wet sand, carrying a notebook. She never spoke much, but she always wrote. Every day, words filled the pages, reflections, fragments, questions she didn't need answers to. And then one morning, she began recording stories, not hers, but others. People who had been deceived under the guise of love, loyalty, or success. It wasn't about revenge. It was about awareness. Over time, her story became something else entirely. No longer about what was taken, but about what she rebuilt. She launched a foundation, quietly, effectively, focused on financial transparency in relationships and partnerships. No grand openings. No billboards. Just real guidance for those too afraid to ask for help. Her work wasn't loud, but it was precise, just like the evidence that changed her life. The same discipline that uncovered deceit now built safety for others. She never said his name again. In her interviews, she referred to him only as the lesson. When asked what she would tell someone standing in the same place she once stood, her answer never changed. Don't chase closure. Build boundaries. Because closure is often a story we tell ourselves to make pain feel complete. But boundaries are the walls that keep peace inside. There's a kind of strength that comes after exposure, not loud, not vengeful. It's the quiet strength of someone who's learned that surviving isn't about winning, it's about becoming whole again. She once said, "I don't believe in happy endings. I believe in honest ones." And maybe, that's what this was, an honest ending to a dishonest story. What would you do if the person you trusted most turned your love into leverage? Would you stay silent, or would you stand under the same lights that once blinded you, and speak your truth? Her journey isn't just a story. It's a reminder. That evidence is power. That silence is a choice. And that sometimes, exposing betrayal isn't the end of a marriage. It's the beginning of a movement. Years have passed since the night of the gala. The room that once glittered with applause is now just a memory, a photograph tucked inside a folder marked Exhibit A. But her name appears elsewhere now. In boardrooms. In lectures. In quiet conversations between strangers who found courage through her silence turned into speech. She built something that didn't seek attention but demanded integrity. A foundation that began with one woman's heartbreak and evolved into a network of accountability stretching across industries and borders. She taught auditors how to trace emotional manipulation through bank statements. She taught survivors how to document without fear. She reminded lawmakers that behind every unreported fraud was a person who once believed love was a contract of safety. One afternoon, she stood on a stage again, smaller this time, simpler. No chandeliers. No cameras. Just folding chairs and faces that wanted to listen. She adjusted the microphone and began with the same calm that once carried her through courtroom silence. "The hardest thing," she said, "is realizing that healing isn't the absence of pain. It's learning to live without letting it manage you." The audience didn't cheer. They sat still, absorbing. Because they weren't hearing a success story. They were hearing proof. Documentaries were made. Articles written. But she never centered herself as the victim. She called herself the reminder that vigilance can coexist with vulnerability. Every donation to her foundation funded workshops in communities often overlooked, teaching people how to see patterns before they break trust completely. The work spread quietly, like light under a closed door. Some evenings, she still walks along the coastline. Locals say she carries no notebook anymore, only a single folded letter she never sent. The one that begins with, "Thank you." Not gratitude for the betrayal, but for the clarity it forced. For the lesson that truth, once spoken, doesn't belong to the betrayer, it belongs to everyone willing to face it. The man whose empire once glittered on magazine covers remains a footnote in financial reports, a cautionary name attached to oversight reforms. His silence has become her closure. And somewhere in the archives of her foundation, next to her first case file, a handwritten note reads, "Justice isn't loud. It's consistent. If you've ever believed your voice didn't matter, remember her. The woman who stood beneath golden lights and turned humiliation into reform. The one who proved that even the quietest truth can change the systems built to hide it." Her story may end here, but her legacy continues in every document signed honestly, every partnership built transparently, and every person who decides silence is no longer safety. Because exposure began her freedom. Accountability sustained it. And truth became her legacy.